Welcome back to Wooden Sticks, recording today from the Aquarius Home Services Studio. And the beauty of the Home Services Studio that Aquarius brings us is it is a mobile studio, and we are recording on a Thursday morning in glorious Montreal, Canada, on the heels of a wild win in Toronto on Wednesday night. And we're going to do this periodically. This is going to be a show for the majority of the time that is driven by the guests that we have on. But I would say, 2, 3, maybe 4 times a year, it'll be a solo show, which it will be today. It is just yours truly, Kevin Gorg, here on Wooden Sticks. And we're going to talk about a bevy of topics. We're going to focus in on a look back at Hockey Day Minnesota, which last weekend took place at Valley Fair in Shakopee, another wonderful rendition of that. And so we'll kind of go through the day that it was in Shakopee, some high school players and teams that have caught our eyes, and then we'll take a look back at the history of Hockey Day Minnesota, and then we'll even have a little sneak peek at what lies ahead the next couple of years with that great event. We'll always talk about the Minnesota Wild on this show. That is going to be an A topic for us throughout, especially now in the heart of the season. As they continue to impress, especially away from home. We'll get into some of the reasons that I believe this team is a stronger team away from home and maybe how they can make that adjustment here as we come down to the second half of the season and figure out how to get back to winning on home ice, because it's remarkable when you take a look at the numbers and how dramatic they are from home and away. And of course, as we progress, we'll just start to take a peek at the landscape of both high school and college hockey, getting closer now to focusing in on the pairwise on the men's side. Both, Minnesota's women's and men's team look like powers in college hockey. Both look like they are going to be 1 seeds once the NCAA tournament rolls around. We'll talk about some powers in high school hockey. And I want to start the show today, though, with a little rest in peace to a great contributor to our game in the state of Minnesota, John Gilbert, longtime writer with the Star Tribune, made his home in Duluth here, passed away in the last 48 hours. And Mr. Gilbert was always pushing for more hockey coverage, had a great passion on the amateur side for high school hockey. And our paths had crossed numerous times, but most specifically come state tournament time. And as we've talked about here on the show, my path in broadcasting started way back in the early 90s. I had, when I went to the University of St. Thomas and played hockey for the Tommies, majored in teaching and coaching, got my coaching certificate, but I had a minor in sports broadcasting. It was always something that I thought might be a good fit. And so those early years when I was working with LaPanta, the voice of the Wild now on our TV broadcast, Anthony and I would work for KABL, an outlet out of White Bear Lake, and we did a Prep Sports Weekly show. But most importantly, we did section playoff games and state tournament games. And every time you got to the state tournament, you always connected with some of those legendary writers and broadcasters across the state of Minnesota. And John Gilbert was a guy that was a fixture at all those tournaments and had great opinions, had great passion. And so for years, I've been attending the tournament, again, early on as a broadcaster, but then in later years as a fan. And these last few years, when you work the Wild beat like Anthony and I do, we're normally traveling the week of the actual tournament, but we'd always seem to get back in time to make an appearance on Championship Saturday, and that's where you'd always find John Gilbert. And, we weren't super close, but I got to tell you, he was one of those guys I loved having conversations with because he was a wealth of knowledge, because he cared so much, and he understood the value of that state tournament and what a big deal it was and still is. And that to me was the common bond we always had. I didn't always agree with his hockey opinions. I don't think everybody agrees across the board with anybody. But the one thing we always agreed on is just how special that weekend was in Minnesota. And he'll be missed, no question about it. Just a a wonderful ambassador for our game. So definitely wanted to give a tip of the hat here in the opening segment to Mr. Gilbert. And I just hope that we continue to, I know it's kind of right now, if you follow high school hockey, it's a different way of digesting it. For all of us that grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s even, when it was high school hockey season, you took the time to go get a newspaper in the morning to look at the box scores, to look at the standings, and more importantly, to look at the schedule and find out which games you could get to in the coming days and or weekend. Now, of course, it's all online, but for many, many years, John Gilbert was one of those voices and one of those places you went to get an update on everything that was going on in the world of hockey, but specifically high school hockey. And so I know now it's a different way that we digest it, and the folks that cover it need to be supported as much as humanly possible because, for instance, the Hockey Hub websites on both the boy and girl side here in Minnesota are incredible and just a great resource. And they remind me of the value we used to have in the handheld newspaper. We'd go spend for a while it was 25 cents, then it was 50 cents and onward, dating myself here. But that was the biggest reason in the winter you went and got those sports sections because that was the only place you could find coverage of your favorite high school hockey teams. And so Mr. Gilbert was a huge fixture in that arena. And so just a wonderful, wonderful life lived in terms of loving hockey and finding a way and carving out a niche to be entrenched in that game that he loves so much. And again, one of those guys that I was lucky enough to get to know. And the hockey world is always a tight-knit community. And so reading some of the tributes to John Gilbert here as I traveled last night from Toronto to Montreal got me a little emotional for sure, and something I wanted to address here during the opening part of the show. The meat and potatoes, the middle part of the show, we're going to talk Hockey Day Minnesota. We're going to look back at what was a great weekend in Shakopee. We'll kind of go through the history of the event, maybe some things that stand out from each and every site. We'll talk a little Minnesota Wild, and then we'll come back in the final segment and talk a little high school hockey. I got to thank my friend John Schweitz with Minnesota Masonic Charities. They continue to do such great work in our community, and want to really send out a heartfelt thanks to he and his crew for supporting this podcast. They've got the Children's Hospital, the home over in Bloomington, and of course, John and I have our charitable podcast we do called The Kindness Chronicles, along with Steve Brown. And so John's been a longtime supporter of mine, and especially with this new project in Wooden Sticks here as we work our way through the first year of doing this. We couldn't do it without his help. So thank you to John Schweitz and Minnesota Masonic Charities. And now one of our newest supporters is on board. Let's hear from OnX Maps.
We've told you about OnX Hunt. Now let me tell you about OnX Fish. Ice fishing is here, and it's time to hit the frozen water with OnX Fish. The Fish app is the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your confidence on ice. Use OnX Fish to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potentials. OnX Fish also shows you hot spots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. For a limited time, download OnX Fish for free in Minnesota and Wisconsin, or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information on the app that is changing the game on ice.
All right, welcome back to Wooden Sticks, for recording here from the Aquarius Home Services Studio on location in Montreal. As you get to this podcast probably on the weekend here, the Wild had a victory in Toronto last night. We're playing the Montreal Canadiens tonight in Marc-Andre Fleury's final appearance just outside his hometown. So it's going to be an emotional night. Really, really looking forward to this. And part of our Wild conversation towards the end here of this middle segment will also touch on my 5 must-attend places for Wild fans. If you can get to a road game, I've got my top 5. I've been doing this now. This is year number 19 on the beat. with the Minnesota Wild, and I've got 5 arenas that fans need to get to for a road venue. But first of all, we're going to start with some high school hockey, and we were treated to a perfect setting in Shakopee. We don't have a lot of control with the weather, and as I go through some of the history of this event, we'll get into some of the crazy weather that we've dealt with. But mid-20s with cloud cover most of the day, sun peeking through at different points. Not a lot of wind, which was really helpful. And then just really outstanding hockey games. And I think the day started out with just a great matchup between small town Minnesota, Hibbing Chisholm, taking on one of the big city teams at Eden Prairie, Class A, Double A. You hope when you get a matchup like that it's competitive, and it absolutely was. So this Hibbing team certainly needs to be taken seriously here down the stretch and into their Class A playoffs. Eden Prairie got the win. They had to work hard to get there. It was just a great back and forth game. There was skill all over the ice, and when you take it outdoors, sometimes it can really dampen what some of those skill players can do. But the ice was pristine, especially early in the morning. We had an 8:30 puck drop. We had a nice crowd on hand for that hockey game. And I got to be honest, leading up to Hockey Day, I had some doubts as to how it would look aesthetically on TV. I wasn't sold on the Valley Fair idea, and then I watched it play out, and I'm like, this is fantastic. Like it is far, far better once I got to see it than I expected it to be. Certainly the weather played a part in that, and I was located for the first 2 games outdoors in between the benches, which was really cool as well to kind of get the back and forth, get to hear the coaches talking to those players, and then just to soak up the excitement level. The kids are all wide-eyed. They're having so much fun. They're playing on this big stage, and that's kind of what Hockey Day is all about. I think now it's become, here in year 19, an event where it's on all day, whether you're, at the cabin, at home, running errands on the weekend. It's maybe sometimes it's background noise. Maybe there's a connection you have to some of the teams, and you'll dive in for a couple hours, and then it always comes to a crescendo at the end when we get to St. Paul for the Wild game. But, we're on for 13, 14, 15 hours straight with hockey. And for people that love the game, like I think a lot of the people that listen to this show, it is a hockey holiday. It really is. And it's a day that continues to grow and get bigger and better. And so to see Valley Fair and Shakopee come out and put on such a great show, starting with that first game, that was awesome. Loved watching the Gophers in Bemidji State. As most of you know here on the show, I was a 10-year head coach at the University of St. Thomas on the women's side. It was a tremendous honor to be there at my alma mater to start that program from the ground up, being their first ever coach. And along with Tom Pelkowski, my dear friend, really proud of what we built. And Tom took over and took it to the next level after I moved on in 2007. To go full-time at the time with Fox Sports North. But really excited to see women's college hockey growing and thriving the way it is. Abby Murphy blew me away. The goal she scored, the talent that she has, and just talking to one of my former players, Jess Christofferson, who works on that staff with Brad Frost, to understand that she's getting NIL money and making a pretty good amount of money as a women's Division I college hockey player made me smile to see where this game has gone. I am lucky enough, and we've had some of these people on the show, to be a friend with Rhonda and Renee Curtin, with Natalie Darwitz, with Chrissy Wendell, some of the real rock stars in the game that I grew up watching and respecting, and some coached with me, including Rhonda. Renee was around our program. Just phenomenal people. And to see how that game has come of age and to see them on Hockey Day, Minnesota, it was really cool. And then I had to hustle over to St. Paul and let Jamie Hurst take my spot for that third game. But all was extra special when the hometown team delivers, and Shakopee did just that. They've got a wonderful team. Keep an eye out for the Sabres here when it comes to section playoff time. They are going to be a force to be reckoned with, and they showed just how good they are. Now, the 5-1 score over Maple Grove probably doesn't tell the story. It was a closer game than that, but the crowd was electric. The team played great, and it really put the icing on top of the cake in terms of them hosting this great event and how all that hard work. And, when we talk about Hockey Day Minnesota, it isn't just that final day. It's a week-long celebration, but it's months and months of preparation, much of which is done by volunteers that aren't making any money. And these communities embrace the event. They put on a spectacular show, but there are so many hours of work that go into this behind the scenes. And so love to see it get paid off with the day that we had last week in Shakopee. The next two events, next year we're going to be in H-Town, as I call it, Hastings, Minnesota. They've got a wonderful rink set up there. Shane Hudella, who's been just a huge asset for everybody involved on the military side, but the Wounded Warriors have a full-time outdoor rink. It is spectacular. This venue is going to be great, and the rink has already been up and going, and so we've had a chance to peek at that, and Hastings will do an awesome job next year because Hastings is a Twin Cities community for sure. It's a suburb, but it's got that small-town feel, and I always think that those places have the best chance to crush it on Hockey Day. I think Hastings will do that, and then the year after, in 2027, it was announced we're going to Brainerd. I'm a huge fan. Get up there a handful of times every single year. It's my favorite place to vacation in the state of Minnesota, without a doubt. Grandview Lodge is just incredible, and love spending time up there. So looking forward to Brainerd in 27, Hastings in 26. Put that on your calendars. And so I thought it'd be a good time to kind of go back and reflect, and just briefly, we're not going to, micromanage this, but look back at how Hockey Day came to be and where we've been. And so this event started way back in 2007. It was my final year as head coach at the University of St. Thomas with the women's team there. And we were up in Baudette Bay. And the Wild started this initiative, and Fox Sports North at the time, which is who we are now, FanDuel Sports Network. I know that's kind of hard to keep track of all the different names we've had, but we decided, along with the Wild, to put together some type of day where we can celebrate the game at the grassroots level. And they came up with an idea of moving it around the state of Minnesota and having a few games outside, and then at some point, obviously, getting back and ending the day in St. Paul at the Xcel Energy Center for a Minnesota Wild game. In that first year in Baudette was just a kind of a trial and error. And I wasn't on location for that one. I was doing some stuff in the Twin Cities. I had a game to coach that night for the hockey team at St. Thomas, but it was a good day. It was, I think, a day of kind of throwing things off the wall to see if they'll stick type of deal. And we knew we had something. I don't think we had any idea where it was going, but it was really cool. Jim Rich was involved, a longtime Channel 9 sports anchor, and he was fantastic. You knew once you watched it outside that there was going to be something there. And so year two, we stayed right there in Baudette Bay. I think at that point, they hadn't figured out the rotation. They knew that this was a cool spot to do it, kind of a destination like Brainerd, where if you're an outdoors person in Minnesota, you know all about Baudette Bay and the fishing and the snowmobiling and the winter activities that are available there. Year number two was my first year on location. It was 2008. I didn't know it at the time, but it was going to be a very eventful year for me. And I'll never forget it because we were up there for a couple of days getting set up, and it was pretty cold, but it wasn't too bad. Typical Minnesota winters up north in the teens. So that morning, LaPant and I decided to go to breakfast. There's a little cafe right in the middle of town, and we needed to be at the rink by 8 o'clock to get set up for the first of a couple of games. And so we get to breakfast. I think it's like 6:45 or 7 o'clock, and it's just a normal winter morning. It's dark. It's cold for sure. And we start talking about the day and ordering our breakfast and kind of getting through what we need to get through to get prepared to go over there and work. And all of a sudden, we weren't really paying attention, and the sun's starting to come up. And I look over at Anthony and I said, "Look out the window." And all out of nowhere, there's this constant wind and snow. And it's so windy and snowy that we can't literally, out the window, we can't see 10 feet. And so I said, well, this is going to be interesting. And boy, was it ever. As it turned out, the weather spun to a point where the winds were gusting at 30 to 35 miles an hour. The actual temperature was below zero, but the wind chill as the day progressed was between 50 and 60 below zero. In fact, it was so cold that Nick Bukestad and Blaine were scheduled to play Roseau in the second game outdoors that day. And Roseau called over, and this is Roseau, Minnesota, guys. This is hardcore 2-1-8ers, like embracing the elements. We're tough guys. We're going to play anywhere. They're calling saying, we're not going to play. It's too cold. And John Stroh, who was our producer of Hockey Day, and basically, along with Matt Gangle, did everything involved with getting ready for this day and then executing Hockey Day Minnesota, basically told them, listen, we don't have another option. You're coming over and we're playing this game. We've got 2.5 hours of airtime to fill, and we've got a great game scheduled. Blaine's here. You need to play. And they came over, and it was unbelievably cold, and as cold as we've ever been. So cold that we were scheduled to do these outdoor games and then stick around and do a bunch of stuff during the Gopher game, which was the third game. I can't remember who they were playing, but they were at Mariucci. And then, of course, the Wild game at the very end. And so we stuck around, did some things. I remember after those two games, LaPanta and I went for a cruise on a snowmobile, but it was brutally cold, and you kept wanting to get inside and warm up as much as you could. And all of a sudden, at dinner time, they contact us and say, listen, we're going to shut things down. The weather is so cold that the lenses on our cameras are starting to freeze, and they can crack. And obviously that takes care of the camera. It's done. And these are expensive cameras, which is unheard of. I mean, this is just 60 below zero, nutso weather. And so we were scheduled to stay overnight. Now it's like 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and we decide, well, let's just go home. And you've heard the story 1,000 times. We've talked about it on K-Fan. We've talked about it on other podcasts. Bottom line is, Dusty Peterson, Anthony LaPanta, and myself decide we're going to drive home instead of staying overnight because we're done working. Well, we get about a half an hour out of Baudette Bay in a small town called Black Duck. And, the wind has been blowing all day and the snow is everywhere. So we're just cruising down the 2-lane highway, and all of a sudden there's a snowdrift that had blown into the road. And trust me, it's pitch black. You have about 2 seconds. It's like when a deer jumps out in front of you. And I'm driving my minivan, and I hit this would-be snowbank that's blown into the middle of the road, and it spins our vehicle down an embankment, and we roll 7 or 8 times into a farm field. We're all okay somehow, some way. The Lord was looking down on us this night for sure. And now it's 60 below, and we're already in comfortable clothes. We've taken off all our outdoor gear. We're wearing sweatshirts and jeans. We're getting ready for this 7-hour drive, and we're in the middle of this field, upside down. And so we get unhooked and find our phones, and I look at Anthony, I'm like, we got to find a car here. And luckily we see some headlights off in the distance, and LaPanta runs down to flag down this car, and the rest is history. We end up being okay. The car was totaled. We end up sitting, Dusty, me, Anthony, and the tow truck driver, 14 hours because we couldn't go very fast, lugging that car back to the Twin Cities. And lots of stories that came out from it. But the bottom line is the tone was set in 2008 that the elements were never going to win, that we were going to play hockey. We were going to celebrate on Hockey Day, Minnesota. And the next year we went to St. Paul, and St. Paul Johnson with Moose at the helm was a fantastic host. We had great weather. I remember Minnetonka being the girls' game there. Julie Friend, who's now a broadcaster and has been a longtime friend of mine, was their rock star goalie. That was a beautiful setting. And, Phelan Park in St. Paul, everybody came out to see that. First time we had food trucks involved, that would be a tone setter for sure. The next year we were in Hermantown, where this is now 2010, and the weather was not cooperative this day. We had a little warmer weather. We had some sleet, some snow, some rain. The ice was pesky at best. What I remember about that is Eden Prairie and Kyle Rao were one of the teams up there, and even in the bad conditions, you could see how much skill they possess. So that was kind of cool. And Hermantown's such a great hockey town, and this was kind of on the front end of their dynasty, so you kind of set the tone for the next decade of success they would have up there. Moorhead in 2011, I'll never forget, because Dick Bramer, longtime Twins play-by-play guy, was in charge of doing the announcing up there. And we're excited about a great matchup. I know Hill Murray was involved in this game, and both teams brought their white sweaters and didn't have their dark sweaters, and Dick was not happy, and I don't blame him, because for a play-by-play guy, that is incredibly hard. The other factor that Moorhead showed us on hockey day is at some point we need to get a refrigerated rink system because the sun was an issue. The temperature was in the upper 20s. The sunshine was bright. And in one of the corners, the rink was basically unplayable. Thank goodness no one got hurt. We played through it. We got through it okay in outdoor fashion where you just kind of play the conditions you're given. But I'll never forget that we kind of walked away from that hockey day saying at some point we got going to have to manage how this ice surface can handle weather. And that came to a crescendo the very next year in 2012 when Minnetonka hosted because they couldn't get their ice set up. They wanted to do it out on Lake Minnetonka, and they could not get the ice to take. The weather was not cooperative the week leading up to it. We had to move it indoors. And people always ask me my favorite and least favorite hockey days, and this is no disrespect to Minnetonka, which is my hometown now, and a great hockey town for sure. But moving it indoors was such a buzzkill. And, clearly we got through it fine, and we still celebrated Hockey Day Minnesota. But indoors is just not where this is meant to be. And so that, to me, will always be the bummer of 2012. And again, it hasn't happened since. So I think we learned our lesson. But the next year, we, again, had incredibly challenging weather on Lake Pekegama up in Grand Rapids. This is 2013. When I think of a great hockey town, Grand Rapids might be at the top of my list. You know my affection for Jim Jutland, who's been a guest on this show, and we hope to have back here this year a second time. But Grand Rapids crushed it. Great crowds, great atmosphere. The weather was pesky. And Sophia Minart is the sideline reporter for the Milwaukee Brewers. She's awesome, but she's this petite little blonde, and she had decent outdoor clothing, but in this weather, it didn't matter what you had on. It was windy, it was cold, and she was on ice level like I was this past couple games at Hockey Day in Shakopee, and she was bitterly cold, and it was her only appearance on Hockey Day. I think we scared her away with the weather, but Sophia is just so good at her job. She got through it, but the weather was absolutely the story in Grand Rapids, and of course we had just awesome games outdoors. And, Benilde St. Margaret's was involved, Jack Jablonski's group, and Grand Rapids had a great team. It was just a phenomenal event, and the city just really embraced Hockey Day. So that was a fun one. And then we come to 2014, and this will always be my favorite Hockey Day, at least to this point. And it's hard to separate them because they're all so cool and they're all unique and special. But Elk River Hankey Pit was a perfect setting. This has been there for as long as I can remember, this beautiful place where any kid that plays hockey in Elk River can go skate. And it's set kind of in a bowl in the middle of the community. They take such great pride in Hankey Pit. And the games outdoors were great. But what I'll never forget is Nate Prosser playing for the Minnesota Wild, Elk River guy that grew up skating at Hankey Pit. He was a journeyman defenseman that Mike Yeo used as kind of that third pairing. He'll fight once in a while. He'll definitely block shots. He plays with grit. You're not going to put him on the ice in overtime, and he's not going to score in overtime. Somehow, some way, he ends up on the ice, and he scores the game-winning goal on Hockey Day 2014, which took place in his hometown. It was a Hollywood movie that played out in front of our eyes in real time. It was not scripted. It was incredible. There was all kinds of emotion involved with it. Nate's been on the show. We've talked about it, and it was just incredible. And then the next year, 2015, we moved to one of my favorite settings, Holman Field, an active airfield in St. Paul. We had Hill Murray there. We had St. Thomas Academy there. We had great hockey games. I remember those outdoor games just being tremendous, tremendous hockey games. And again, Holman Field, we're sitting there broadcasting on an active airfield, and then you've got some of those big planes as the backdrop. I mean, it was freaking awesome. And so I thought 2015 was one of those really memorable hockey days. And then we just caught a stretch of great luck. The next, I would say, you could say the next handful of years. Duluth in 2016, Bayfront Park crushed it. The weather was perfect. And Duluth, man, they're going to support any hockey tournament, but specifically a day like Hockey Day, they came out with ginormous crowds, and and really, I thought, took it to the next level. And that brought us to 2017 in Stillwater, Lowell Park, right on the water, the lift bridge as our backdrop. I mean, they crushed it. As far as Twin Cities events go with Hockey Day, I don't know if you can beat the setting that Stillwater had for a Twin Cities event. You know, clearly when you're up north, you've got the lakes and some of those different backdrops, but Stillwater really, I thought, aesthetically took it to an unbelievable level. And then I think the biggest change for Hockey Day might have happened in 2018. And I get a little emotional when I think about this one because I love Bob Motzko. And at some point, we're going to have Bobby on. Maybe it's going to be this year on Wooden Sticks to celebrate a national championship, which I think might be in the offing. They got a great club, and I've known Bobby for 20 years, and he's just one of my all-time favorite human beings. And his son, Mac, who tragically would be lost a few years later in a car accident in Minnetonka, he and Bobby were running around that place, helping set up and greeting people and thanking them for their work. Like they were a fixture there in the days leading up to it, and then all day on the actual event. And I was so entrenched in that relationship and how tight they were, and it ended up being a very heartbreaking part of the Hockey Day memory. But Lake George in St. Cloud was the first time it went to a new level in terms of the village around the event. That's when we saw music and we saw more food trucks and more areas for people to congregate in, shopping venues. It went to another level in St. Cloud. The bar was raised and they took significant action to do that. And I think we're forever going to be grateful to St. Cloud for that. And Bobby and Mac will always be on my mind when I think about 2018 and what they did at Lake George. And that village was spectacular. The next year, once again, weather played a factor, 25 below in Bemidji. Another Hockey Day where we got to see women's Division I hockey, which was awesome. Mankato got the better of Bemidji there. Horns up for my guy Alex producing this show, and my dear friend Dan Myers, who micromanages everything that Minnesota State does. But we got to say horns up for that big win on Hockey Day 2019. Jamie Hirsch was big time. You know, she had moved on to NHL Network, and she was back kind of anchoring some of our coverage. She was so cold, and she could not warm up in Bemidji as a lot of people kind of tried to weather that storm. 2020 was cool because we got to go to Parade Stadium in Minneapolis and celebrate hockey in the city. And I think it's hockey that gets overlooked sometimes. And we got to see just how tremendous hockey could be there. There was an awesome alumni game there with a bunch of NHL alumni involved. And Parade Stadium was a great venue for Hockey Day. Speaking of Mankato, we had the COVID year in 2021. So Mankato got an extra year to prepare. And boy, did they crush it. I got to tell you, the folks in Mankato, with St. Cloud, everything just kind of got pushed to another level. The crowds were enormous. I think if I look at all the Hockey Days and all the crowds we've had, I don't think we had bigger crowds than we had in Mankato. And to get to see my team, St. Thomas, who had just gone Division I, play the Mavericks. Ironically, they're going to be playing this weekend again. And they become kind of rivals because they've been two of the better teams in that conference. But the weather was cool. We had snowfall. We had giant crowds. We had that awesome band that the Mavericks have. It really was a spectacle. And Mankato absolutely crushed the day. They were phenomenal in their setup. They were phenomenal in their execution. The village was perfect. And that really, again, raised this event to another notch on that level. And White Bear Lake took the torch and ran with it. And I thought White Bear Lake did an awesome job. Anytime you get one of the best rivalries in high school hockey, and White Bear and Hill played on that day to a 1-goal game, it was so spectacular. The village, like in Mankato, was vibrant. The crowds were big. And it just felt to me like Hockey Day had this great momentum, and White Bear Lake kept building off what Mankato had kind of pushed it to. And then Warroad, you knew, like, as soon as I saw the schedule, you knew that Warroad was going to get the job done. I mean, there is a town begging for Hockey Day, Minnesota. The history, the alumni, the lead up, the event, the spectacle. They had guys back from the 1980 Olympic team. Lou Nanny was involved. If you get Lou Nanny out of Florida off the golf course to go to Warroad in the middle of winter, you know you're big time. And Warroad was just that. They were big time. We had lost Henry Boucher in the months leading up to Hockey Day. He was going to be a fixture on that day as well. So we got to celebrate his life and pay tribute to him. There was a documentary that had just been created in his honor. We got to show that. And then just to see how proud everybody was in Warroad of the event and how it came together. And it was so good. And yes, like the Hockey Day the year previous, one of the greatest rivalries in the state, Roseau and Warroad got to play, and the hometown team came out on top. So that was spectacular, and that led us to this year in Shakopee. So 19 years of Hockey Day Minnesota. We'll have our 20th anniversary next year over in Hastings, and I'm confident that we will continue to grow this great event along with the Minnesota Wild and put on a great show, most importantly. So again, thank you to everybody involved that helped get this done. And this was our first year on the broadcast side without John Stroh and Matt Gangle. Very difficult challenge. Trevor Fleck, one of our executive producers, stepped in and did unbelievable work. And his name needs to be mentioned. And we had a lot of people in different roles this year on the broadcast side that crushed it. And so led by Trevor Fleck, it was a new way of doing it. And, really, I just think the event stands alone. It is now come to a place in 19 years where everybody throughout the state embraces it. And you don't have to be there to be a part of it. People have the fire pits in their backyard. They're heading to the outdoor rink. They're taking their little Billy or Bobby or Susie or Jenny to the rink for their game. And then they're coming back to huddle around the TV and to watch part of the Hockey Day production. The stuff on social media allows us to connect everybody throughout Minnesota. And then just talking to some of the players this year over at Shakopee that have relatives throughout the country that are able to watch all over the world. We celebrate the game that we love here in Minnesota. So I thought it'd be a perfect time to kind of look back at that event, celebrate it, talk about what lies ahead, and really just give a tip of the hat to everybody that puts the work in. So this year at Valley Fair, for the organizing committee and all the volunteers, a job well done. It was great to be out there and amongst all the folks at Valley Fair, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful setting on TV. So you guys did a hell of a job. All right, we got one more segment to go. We're going to talk a little Wild hockey. I'm going to get into my 5 favorite buildings that Wild fans need to visit when they get on the road to support their favorite team. And again, you're listening to Wooden Sticks, recording from the Aquarius Home Services studio. We'd love to make you a part of the show. There is one person that can facilitate that, whether it's you, a family member, or a friend that has a business that needs more exposure. Andrew Height, the White Dog, can get it done. All you have to do is email the White Dog, AHEYDT @talknorth.com, and we will put your business out there and draw people to you here on this program. Back in just a quick minute to put a close on the show. Okay, final segment here of the program. Look for some more great content next week. Very, very excited about the place we're at now with the Minnesota Wild. They are continuing what has been a remarkable season. When you consider not just the man games they've lost, because that really doesn't tell the story, which players they have had to play without, to me, has been the biggest story of this season. And right now we're dealing with the second stint of Kirill Kaprizov being lost. For 4 to 6 weeks this time, he's already missed, I think, 12 or 13 games. And that's the best that the Wild have to offer. That's their superstar player. If this was a one-man band, they would be in a position now where they probably couldn't win. But they've been missing Jonas Brodin. For stints, they've been missing Marcus Johansson. They've been missing Jake Middleton, Jared Spurgeon, Brock Faber. The list goes on. And they just continue to find ways to win hockey games. And I think as we're recording this on a Thursday, we're coming off a game in Toronto where the Wild faced a Maple Leafs team that had been the best in their division. They've been the best home team in the National Hockey League. They were coming off 2 losses, so you knew you're going to get their best effort. But while we're up there without Kaprizov, still no Brodin, still no Johansson, took the lead early and really played the type of hockey game you have to play. I look back at the game in Colorado on Martin Luther King Day, same type of game. Outmanned on paper, the home team being the betting favorite significantly, and a Wild team that doesn't blink. And the part we need to celebrate is just how confident this hockey team is on the road. They're just a different team on the road. There's no way to get around it. And when you go to places like Toronto, it's a hockey mecca. And I always say, when you're in Toronto and Montreal and you're at morning skate and we're doing our normal activities, waiting for John Hines to give his morning skate presser, waiting to get players once they come off the ice, figuring out what the lineup's going to look out, you bump into hockey royalty. And I was lucky enough yesterday in Toronto to bump into Brian Burke, somebody that I've respected for a long time, been lucky enough to get to know just a little bit over the years. This is a guy that's been a general manager of multiple hockey teams, including a Stanley Cup champion. He put together the team in Anaheim that won the Cup in 2007. This guy knows as much about hockey as anybody. And we talked in the morning yesterday about the Wild. And first thing you want to talk about was Kirill Kaprizov. And he just said, as a fan of the game, I love watching that kid play hockey. And he said, what's he like? And I said, well, I'll tell you what he's like, Brian. I said, he's the guy that they have to drag off the rink after practice every single day. He's the guy that truthfully is happiest when he's playing hockey. So the fact that he had to go get this surgery and miss 4 to 6 weeks is probably breaking his heart. And he had a big smile. He's like, that's so great to hear, because he'll be back and he'll be better. And he said, the Wild have something here. And he said that there is something with this hockey team, because he is a guy that grew up in Edina. He's a guy that I think keeps in touch with Minnesota sports, but specifically the Wild. And this is before the game. This is before they went out and beat the Maple Leafs. He was talking about Kirill and talking about this team looking forward, big picture, to what could be a very dangerous playoff team. And if Brian Burke is saying that, I'm going to listen, because this guy knows what a Stanley Cup contender looks and feels like. And he really, from that conversation, I could tell had a lot of positivity around the Wild. Now, there's going to be some challenges. I think the biggest issue right now for Minnesota is going to be not to let their guys get run down. And when you can have nights like last night, where your depth players are playing a significant role. And last night, Minnesota's fourth line was unbelievable. And it's not just the first goal where Devin Shore goes in and starts on the forecheck with a good physical play. And then the F2 is Jakub Lauko. He gets the puck, makes a play, cool pass to the slot, and who's the Dinovs there to finish it off. It wasn't just the goal. It was the minutes they played, the type of minutes, how confident they were, the fact that John Hines could put them out there in a road situation where matchups are not dictated by the Wild and still survive and thrive. That's key. And they got a lot of contributions from their depth players last night. Freddie Gaudreau had another strong game. That's what's going to carry this club, because they can't run Rossi and Boldy and Zuccarello and Eck into the ground here without some of their key players, specifically Kaprizov, up front. And if you can get nights like last night and the game we saw in Colorado, where all four lines are going, that's going to make this process a lot easier. And the other thing they've got working for them right now is they've got this long road trip, which we're on. We've still got a game tonight in Montreal, over the weekend in Ottawa, and then in Boston. Then you've got 2 home games and 2.5 weeks off. That's a chance to recharge. And hopefully after that break, once the Wild start to get the Brodins and the Johanssons back, yes, it sucks that Kaprizov is not going to be a part of it, but they, I think, are in a position now where if they can just, basically from this point on, play 500 hockey, you're going to end up with somewhere in the mid to upper 90s in terms of points, and you're in the playoffs. And most years I'd be sweating trying to get one of the top 2 spots and get home ice advantage. For that postseason, I don't think we need to this year. I think we're better off, if you're a fan of the Wild, you're better off making sure these guys aren't in the top 2 spots in the division and they get to start on the road, because it's not a small sample size we're dealing with here, people. This is a team that is 19-5-3 on the road and 11-12-1 at home. And certainly they've got to figure it out, because if you look at the calendar, the month of March, they are home most of the month, and they've got a ton of hockey games. But if they end up on the road for the playoffs, they'll be just fine. They are just a super confident team away from home. They play a more simple game. And I don't know what it is. We've had these conversations with Ryan Carter, with Lou Nanny on this trip, which is really cool. Wes Walls, Ben Clymer. They got a lot of young dads that have young kids. Maybe that's part of it. They seem to play a more tense, nervous game at home, like they're trying to put on a show and sometimes can't do that. Or when they get on the road, they just play freely. They play smart without the puck. They play a simple North game where they just get the puck out of one zone into the next and attack. They've got to figure out a way to do that. And we were joking on the bus ride in to our hotel in Montreal once we landed last night that maybe somebody should sabotage the piping underneath and we're kidding here, by the way, this isn't serious. We're kidding, but wreck the rink so they can't play an XL for the final couple months, because it's dramatic to me how much better they've been on the road. So anyway, they're in a great spot. Right now, as you look at the standings, Winnipeg is borderline running away with the top of the division with 73 points. Dallas and Minnesota in that 2 and 3 spot with 65 and 64 points, respectively. Minnesota right now 1 point in the rears of the Dallas Stars, having played one more game. And then they've got a 4-point cushion on Colorado for fourth in the Central, and they've played one less game than the Avalanche. So keep an eye on that spot. I do think for Minnesota, it'd be a good landing spot where they are right now in that third spot. I like the matchup with Dallas. I know that if you look at the numbers in the last series and all the yada, 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 Dallas has had the upper hand. I think this team can beat Dallas. I really do. I think the matchup would be good. I like it better than the matchup with Winnipeg. To me, the physicality that Winnipeg brings along with the skill can be a bit of a problem for Minnesota. When you look at some of our key guys, specifically guys like Kaprizov and Spurgeon that are a little more on the smaller side, that Winnipeg matchup, you want to hold off at least for one series. So I like the 3-2 setup right now with Minnesota and Dallas, and I'll be perfectly happy if they start on the road. So now our final piece of the puzzle here to put a close on the show for Wooden Sticks this week is 5 buildings you need to get to. If you're a big fan of the Minnesota Wild and you have the resources to travel, my dear friend, Andy Luckcraft, who was also a goalie in God's country in Burnsville in the 80s, he passed the torch to me. He was the starting goalie in 1984. I started in 1985 when he graduated. He just had his daughters at one of these arenas this past weekend, which I will get to, but I wanted to give a shout out to Andy because he's a regular listener to the show here. But number 5 on the list, as we work in reverse order, is T-Mobile out in Las Vegas. I think I've talked about this a couple of times. When you go to Vegas and take in a hockey game, it is much more like a show than a hockey game. The lead up to it, they've got a whole skit they do on the ice, the music there, the sound system. I mean, literally, I'm ice level, and the boards around the rink are shaking. It's one of the loudest buildings I've ever been in. It's got a great atmosphere, and half the crowd, honestly, when the Wild play there, are Minnesota Wild fans. So when you're out there, you're amongst friends from Minnesota that are trying to warm up and trying to check out the spectacle that T-Mobile can provide. Get to Vegas, check it out. Of course, Vegas has got all kinds of fun things to do. I'm really excited I get to be out there in May to take in a Kenny Chesney concert at the Sphere, which I have heard is pretty cool too. Lots of reasons to get to T-Mobile. Number 5 on my list. Number 4 is kind of under the radar, and it's Ball Arena in Denver. And I got to tell you, we were just there on Martin Luther King Day, and it reminded me again of what a special place that is. Tremendous atmosphere. You always get a good game. For whatever reason, the Avalanche are good every year, and the Wild are getting to that level. But these teams play such fantastic games, and we've had some amazing games out there. The playoff history where the Wild have had some great luck in that building. And again, it's another place for whatever reason, there are a bunch of Wild fans. Now, it's not 50-50 like it can be at T-Mobile in Vegas, but there's a good percentage of Wild fans. I think there are Minnesotans that live out there. It's an easy place to travel to, and it's a wonderful building. Loud, vibrant, great place to watch a hockey game, easy to get to. Flights can be cheap. They can be quick. You can get there, and you're going to see an awesome game. Get to Ball Arena. I mentioned my dear friend Andy Luckcraft. Number 3 is where I just got to see him a few days ago, and that was last weekend at the United Center in Chicago. I'm going to tell you this, and I know that the people that listen to this show are obviously sports fans. If you can find a better place to take in the national anthem than the United Center in Chicago, please show me, because to me it's undefeated, and I've been all over the world. Everybody's cheering. Everybody's going crazy. It's an incredible performance. It's an incredible moment. It gives you chills. The anthem at the United Center, the building, and of course, right now, the Wild can't lose. They're 15-0-1 in their last 16 against the Hawks. So if you're going to spend the time and money to go on the road and watch your favorite team, it's an almost guaranteed victory. It's an unbelievable national anthem. It's a cool building. It's a great city with all kinds of great food. The United Center makes my top 5 at number 3. Tonight, I get to take in number 2. As I mentioned, I'm in Montreal, and the Bell Center is spectacular. It's full every single time we come here. Pure hockey fans that get it, that appreciate a good play by either team. Tonight, and again, if you're getting to this podcast this weekend and it's in the rearview mirror, you probably have watched the game. The love that they're going to show Marc-Andre Fleury tonight is going to be incredible. It's going to make this one of the most magical nights of the year. It's a building you need to get to. It's a cool city. It's got a European feel to it, all kinds of great restaurants. Lou Nanne, who's on this trip, said over the years as a player, as a coach, as a GM, and now as a broadcaster, it is his number 1 very favorite place to visit. And he's the Godfather. You got to trust the Godfather. Get to Montreal, get to Bell Center. And for me, number 1 with a bullet, without a doubt. When I get the question, what's your favorite? It's Madison Square Garden. It's New York City, baby. It can't be topped. It can be a Monday night. It can be a Thursday night. It can be a Tuesday night. The games just feel big on that stage. Madison Square Garden is awesome. The production there is so cool. There are movie stars in that building. Ryan Reynolds on the kiss cam with Henrik Lundqvist. Our female listeners are overheating right now, and that's cool. It's New York, where you've got so much to do and so much to see. And I'm telling you, the rink is so awesome. It is, without a doubt, my favorite place to broadcast on the road. And if you're a Wild fan, you only get one chance a year. But the good news is, as we're recording this podcast, the Wild don't play there till April. And you could make a real cool trip of this, because when we go out east and play the Rangers, we always play the Devils and the Islanders on that same trip. And so if you look at the Wild schedule right now and you see that first week in April, you can get multiple games, but do not miss the one in the middle this year. Madison Square Garden, New York City, number 1 on my list. That is a wrap on the show today. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Appreciate the support we've had. And again, if you've got some suggestions for guests, you can ping me on Twitter or X. I'm at Gorgamatic21. Great time here in Montreal. Looking forward to the big game tonight with Marc-Andre Fleury. As you're getting to this podcast, hopefully you're reflecting on another Wild win. We'll catch you next week here on Wooden Sticks.